Thank you so much for joining us today, Stephen.
Thanks, Lynn.
We've got Steve on because he has got a story about a therapeutic use of MDMA that I had never heard of, and it's a great story, and especially because Stephen himself is a health practitioner, and so you know in depth your own condition and the things that you've tried for it, and the things that should have worked in the way that medical medicine teaches us, and instead something else helped you. So, Steve, if you could take us back and just tell us a little bit about your medical background for some basis here.
Yeah, so I've always had IBS basically since birth. So I actually had a little bit of a birth defect. Well, you'll know what it is, a hydrocele hernia, and so I had a bunch of birth 3 month trauma. But ever since that time, I basically had like IBS, like symptoms, things like that. When I graduated college, about 22, I was a consultant in Chicago working for KPMG, living the fast life, black card lifestyle. And I had such bad bloating and gas that I would cry every day after every meal. And I was trying at that point I was trying the bodybuilding stuff. I was doing salads and chickens and working out for an hour a day. I was also having like acne, and I was having my first panic attacks and depression. But this bloating was the thing that would get me in trouble. Actually got me in trouble at work. And so my boss was like, "Look, your coworkers are complaining about how bad you smell." And I'm like, "Look, I know. I'm crying every day. This is terrible." So I sought help then in Chicago. I saw three different doctors. They tested me for celiac genes. I was negative, and they basically just said, "Look, kid, it sounds like you have IBS in the family history. You've had this for a long time. Here's some antibiotics. There's this thing called Metamucil, and eat more whole grains." That was back in 2008, 2009, and I tried that for like a few days, and then I literally had a diarrhea accident on the way to work on a commuter bus in my suit, and like that was like the last straw, and I just got angry, and I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And my college training is in electrical engineering, and so as far as I'm concerned, all I was in college was brainwashed in how do I solve problems. And to me, the human body, just because it's different than a machine or a robot that I worked on when I worked at General Motors doesn't make it any different. There's a bunch of inputs and outputs, and we don't know a lot about the body actually. It's kind of like electrical engineering systems. And so I just got angry, and I resolved to find people who had reversed their IBS and bloating and do exactly what they did and figure out what worked and then share it with the world. And so we started healthygut.com 10 years ago and started everything from gluten-free diets back then to going through all kinds of crazy stuff with many of the top natural or holistic practitioners out there, lots of functional medicine, and I got better and better, lots of amino acids. But 7 years into that journey, probably $150,000, plus I have my own site now, plus I'm certified by the Kalish Institute in Functional Medicine, and I'm helping other people at this point. I still get recurring bloating pain that is unexplainable. It's medically called visceral hypersensitivity, which most people have never heard of, but it seems to affect like 30 to 70%, I think, is the epidemiological research of IBS patients have this stabbing pain in their gut when the same amount of gas happens for them versus someone who doesn't have visceral hypersensitivity. They have stabbing pain. The studies are really weird. They like shove a tube up your butt and blow you full of gas, and then find out if where you figure out like your pain sensitivity. And people like me are like right at the beginning, and so it's very unexplainable. And the research, modern medicine or alternative medicine, really doesn't have anything for you if it doesn't go away, even after you've corrected your infections and your diet and all these things. And so I kind of just lost, I kind of lost myself. 7 years in, I got this company. I'm, leading hundreds of thousands of people about diet and nutrition and functional medicine, but myself, I'm still not what I would consider healed. And I started doing a lot of emotional and spiritual work with a therapist. And about a little around that time, he was like, "Look, I think that it's time for you to really unpack your emotional, spiritual, and your trauma baggage. You really need to go in this thing called trauma." And I'm coming from a scientific background and medical background, like, okay, like whatever the ACEs study, I don't, I don't even, I'm not even on the ACEs study. I don't meet any of this criteria. This stuff is baloney. And then I had my first big guided MDMA journey session, and that changed everything.
And how did you end up deciding to use MDMA versus a different psychedelic or plant medicine?
Well, I had started with ayahuasca about 18 months prior, and I had a little bit of or not necessarily like, I would say social use of LSD, but still kind of in a very close container. And uh, basically, what was told to me by some experienced guides and some shamans, I don't know if they refer themselves as shamans, and they don't all, but was um, that it's better when it comes to trauma to start with MDMA. Like if you're going to go heroic dose and you're going to go because the plan was to go deeper and deeper into plant medicine, into psilocybin work, and to go into the heroic dose land of Albert Hoffman and Terence McKenna and all these previous people in our history here. And the guide said if you start with a big dose of MDMA, typically a bunch of healing can happen, and you will also get more acclimated to journey space and how you handle essentially that space. It's like the most comfortable, potent medicine for that type of journeying to start with, is what I was told.
Gotcha. And just to clarify for people out there who may not be familiar, when you say heroic dose, you're talking about as opposed to either a microdose, which some people have heard. I don't know about MDMA if there's a microdosing, but like LSD and psilocybin, people talk about microdosing that. And then there's maybe more of, like you said, kind of a social dose. And then
Yeah.
heroic dose is where you're going to definitely experience some things that you should, let's say, not be in a social setting for. Or how would you describe the heroic dose?
Um, yeah. Well, I mean, I think Stanislav Grof. I didn't mean Albert Hoffman earlier. Stan Grof was the guy who really kind of coined these with LSD. But yeah, I think with MDMA, um, my experience is, the MAP studies do about 125 milligrams. Um, that's their standard dosage for the clinical trials for MDMA. I know a lot of people will, usually do that or a little less if they're going to be doing a social dose. Um, the uh, the the stuff that I did was underground, and so the dosing was even higher. And so I did 200 milligrams, which is about 1 milligram per pound of body weight. And then I did a booster, which was, I think, a 50 milligram booster. And so that from what I've heard is in the underground therapy world, a pretty common thing to do 1 milligram per pound and then have a booster of 1/4 to 1/2 of that original dose.
And when do you take the booster?
Um, my experience is that most shamans and most guides, again, I'm not one of them, and I'm not telling you to do it this way, but they'll check in with you about 60 to 90 minutes after you've taken your initial dose, and you'll be having an experience usually by then, or you might not. And so the check-in is they will know in their system based on their hundreds of experiences whether you're entering into the reality that was intended that you had agreed upon prior to going into journey. But you also have a say around, is this, um, am I feeling as much as I want to feel? And you can opt for it as well. So it's typically up to the discretion of the journeyer. However, the guide should have a indication of what's happening.
Okay. And I want to get into the details of what your ceremony was like and how you found a practitioner, but I also want to relieve the, I'm sure, question that everybody has is how did you feel? How did your bloating feel after that first journey?
Yeah, so I mean, things were honestly about 60% different the day after. And we're talking about gas and bloating pain. Like I said, I almost got basically fired for, I got reprimanded for. I mean, I'm a pretty athletic, pretty dude man at some level. I go hunting in the backcountry for elk with a bow, and I do a lot of athletic pursuits that people consider to be very bro-like or dude-like. And I would cry all the time because of this pain in my gut. And 60% was literally gone the next day. It was wild. It was amazing. I For the first time in my life, I could feel bloating. It's not that the bloating went away. It was that the pain associated with the bloating went away. And so in the days afterwards, as many people will know, if they've done some journeys, your stomach can be a little weird in the days are following a journey. And oftentimes it can include bloating. And I was bloated the day after, but I had no pain. And it was like life altering to me. I mean, it was like, I'd never experienced anything like that. I'm like, whoa, I'm kind of pregnant looking, but I feel nothing but a little pressure. This is crazy.
Nice. And with your background and what you know, do you have a hypothesis about how that worked?
Yeah, yeah. So, and just to relieve any other pressure, the other 40% of that pain was relieved later on in a heroic psilocybin journey,
Wow.
about 2 journeys later. So, um, so how I would um, hypothesize about what happened is during that journey, I did a lot of reparenting. I ended up holding a pillow. This was not the intention, but I ended up holding a pillow, and it was like little Steve, who didn't get a lot of things in his childhood. And I also relived a lot of awkward sexual things, a lot of shameful situations as a bloated IBS guy throughout my life. But I relived them in the journey from this really loving third party perspective. And that's part of how I believe MDMA works. But and we can go more into the science of that. You let me know if you want to go there. But specifically on the visceral hypersensitivity and the pain associated, we know that MDMA does affect the NMDA receptors in the gut. And if you look into the research, NMDA receptors are linked to visceral hypersensitivity. And so my hypothesis is that MDMA, ketamine for sure, likely the other ones. We just don't have research yet on psilocybin and LSD, and even more. But I believe, including ayahuasca, ayahuasca, there's a lot of reports around improvement in IBS. I didn't have that experience, but there is a ton of that out there. I believe many of these class of compounds are affecting these receptors. And so we have, I think, a simultaneous release of trauma, that in my case, a simultaneous release of trauma, as well as a chemical change in the NMDA receptors linked to pain pathways. And I think those two factors are the most likely contributors to my experience.
Wow, that's remarkable. And have you met other people? Because I know with the healthy gut that you talk with lots of people. Have you had other people tell you they had a similar experience with MDMA?
Not yet, not yet. I mean, a lot of, I'm sure you can speak more to it, but I hear a lot of MDMA, therapeutic MDMA usage around relationships. I hear a lot of it around attachment theory, reparenting, trauma as well. But I just haven't heard much yet in the way of linking those things and then linking it back to other health conditions, whether it be autoimmune or gut in nature.
So you were kind of on the forefront there.
Yeah, yeah. I typically jump, head first into these types of things for the last 10 years, and it's part of just what I enjoy doing is testing a lot of crazy stuff on myself and then reporting back out to the world on what worked, what didn't work, pros and cons, risk factors, things like that.
And how did you go about finding someone who could lead your journey?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate that my therapist had experience with psychedelic journeying, and so they were plugged into a underground network already, and so I got my intros through referrals. And so I think the best analogy for the underground and finding a practitioner is it's kind of like the mycelium network. It's actually everywhere, all around the world. There's practitioners almost everywhere, but they really keep to themselves because of the legal issues. And it's kind of like you got to know, you got to be vetted before you'll even get an intro into the world. And so, but because of that, the world sort of self-polices itself for the most part. Of course, there's always bad actors and bad apples, so that's not the case. But yeah, in this case, I got referred.
And if you are advising other people that may have similar conditions or one of the other conditions you mentioned that MDMA can help with, what do you suggest that they look for in somebody that's going to help them do one of these journeys?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the first thing I would say is if you can get that referral, that from someone you trust, someone who you really do trust. That's step one. Step two is having a meeting with that person ahead of time. Don't ever just walk into one of these journeys. I mean, some psychiatrists I know who are up on this stuff talk about this in terms of mind surgery. And so we don't just let any surgeon operate on us, let alone a brain surgeon or a mind surgeon without a first meeting. So
Smart.
definitely go for a first meeting and just feel in your body. I mean, one of the biggest things is how safe are you going to feel with this person? And if you have, I know because I've done the journey of trying to find someone that there can be some scarcity around, well, this is my treatment. I know I'm getting all the signs that this is the treatment. I must do this plant medicine. And then you start down the path to try to find someone. And the first people you come in contact with, you're like, shit, they say they can do the thingy. They seem like they have experience, but God, they're young or they feel weird, or I don't know if they're hitting on me. Who else do they know? Like you have these feelings, and so then you have this internal dialogue between, I know this is my next treatment. I'm really maybe literally dying or figuratively, emotionally, spiritually dying. I need a breakthrough. But the first people that I work so hard to get in front of are, I don't feel good in my body. And my advice is walk away. Just the right person will appear if you keep doing the same things that got you connected with the initial person. Of course, ask them, how many of these have they done? What kind of aftercare is there? There ought to be some sort of integration session if they're good at what they do. But yeah, I think what I'm looking for is A, personal experience themselves, B, lots of experience with other people, and then C, just how safe do I feel?
And when you mentioned the integration session, was that done separately? And how long after?
Yeah, it was done. I mean, we had an integration session at the end of our session, which I think is pretty common. And then, about an hour and a half of journaling and talking and just sharing and, making meaning or collecting ideas of what happened. And then the integration session happened a few days later.
And was that like a follow up, asking how you've been since and doing some more of the journaling, or what was that follow up on like?
The follow-up was kind of like, hey, you expressed that, this happened. And then, how is that sitting with you now? Or, that thing with your ex was really up. How are you feeling about that now? It's just sort of a session to, I think the best integration sessions go along the lines of, again, like, let's be clear. So, I have had this with ayahuasca. Some of these journeys can fracture your reality, and you could have an integration session where you're like, I don't know who I am. I don't even know how to feed myself. I don't even know. I don't feel like I can go in public. I don't feel like myself. I feel naked, afraid. Like I've been there. And so that type of integration session is going to be a lot different, and usually is not going to happen on MDMA. That is another reason why MDMA, I think, is considered a great beginner journey medicine. But in this case with MDMA, it was more, and with I think a lot of other integration sessions I've done, is more around what was up, how are you integrating that into your life, what meaning are you making of that? Because I think a lot of mistakes I've made in the past is maybe taking a vision I had or taking an idea that came to me and then assuming I knew more about the world. And then I started to go try to implement that and have it backfire and then have to kind of check in with someone who, basically all day, every day, either facilitates visions and experiences in other worlds. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's sort of a common archetype one that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like an, half wolf, half eagle, but, you can believe what you want.
That's amazing. If you could give us a little bit of firsthand experience about what that journey was like.
Yeah. So, and I really advise a similar routine like this. We set agreements. We had a time. We started in the morning, 9 a.m. Um, Journaled for a little while. Then we set agreements. Things like this is our perimeter physically. You will not leave this perimeter no matter what until we complete the circle. No harm will come to yourself or to me, and you will come back physically no matter what happens. Like those are the three standard agreements I think everybody should consider. But then we did intentions, prayer setting, some saging, uh, and then took the medicine capsule form, and then there was music that was played, and I just basically laid on a bed, and the therapist was in the room and had an eye mask. And kind of for a while I just meditated and thought about those intentions, those prayers, and about 15 minutes in I started to feeling a little like ampy energy, or a little energy kind of come through me. And yeah, as soon as that happened, I was, my instructions were to, when I feel the medicine, to put on my eye mask. And so I put on my eye mask and just kind of laid there. And I think, yeah, for me, MDMA, and I know this journey it's just a rush of energy, like, whoa, sort of like exploding up and out. And I think a lot of oneness is possible. I'm not sure if I had that, but I was just kind of having a lot of energy, kind of shaking. I was holding my belly because I was instructed to just follow any intuitions, follow whatever doors are open, say yes to everything, don't fight anything, and just go with wherever your experience leads you. And so I was kind of shaking my belly. I ended up like really, like I said, like kind of curling up into a ball and like squeezing the fuck out of a pillow. And yeah, like I said, I had a lot of tears, but from just a loving place of holding like little Steven. And then had a lot of like I said, experiencing mostly just like puberty level stuff of being a boy without a lot of direction in this society, and what happens when suddenly you're hard and you want to try to mate with everything and all the time. And I don't know how graphic we can get on this
You're
podcast,
fine.
but um, like there's just a lot of baggage, I think, around sexuality, at least where I grew up in a small town in the Midwest there was. And yeah, so I had a lot of stuff about that. I had some stuff around some other traumas, and then just a lot of, I feel like, repressed shame that wasn't felt, and which included just regrets, not asking out a girl, or not doing a certain thing. And so there was just lots of love while these painful and shameful situations were being replayed in my head, which was really beautiful, and I'd never experienced that before. I had experienced some of those visions on ayahuasca, but due to the serotonin release in MDMA, it was like this loving presence. In ayahuasca, it was more like, like holding my nose in my own shit kind of experience. So, so yeah, I mean, that lasted for 6 or 7 hours, and at some point the guide was like, okay, are you ready to come out and talk about it? And we came out, and I shared and I journaled. She wanted me to journal first and kind of just track what had happened, what did I see. Um, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I love that because I'm sure, well, I'm guessing that's not what you thought you were going to do when you went into the journey, right? What comes up is what needs to come up.
Yeah, no, it was so at that point in time, I was raised Roman Catholic and an altar boy, and I didn't have any trauma around the church other than the society being shoved on me. But I thought I was there to unpack religion and unpack death, because in therapy it was basically like, I'm afraid to be vulnerable, I'm afraid of death, and I can't admit that there's some sort of other spiritual thing here because of the religion I grew up in. So I had no, I wasn't up on trauma lingo. I didn't even really believe in trauma at that point. I was yeah, I was not expecting any of that.
Wow, wow. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so then afterward you have the integration, a few days later you have another integration, and then the success that you felt has been long lasting, correct? The 60% that went away. You said the remaining 40 went away on psilocybin. But at this point between the two of those, you're currently essentially pain free?
Yeah, I can get really, really bloated still. I still tend to try a lot of things, and I do a lot of extreme travel and hunting and stuff. So I'll end up consuming a bunch of carbohydrates, or like right now I'm writing a new book, and so I stress myself out and do silly things to my system, and I still get really bloated, but I just don't experience the pain, and
Wow.
it's really quite profound.
That's remarkable. And did you have any side effects, any negative side effects from the MDMA?
I did not personally. I mean, other than that was quite a loving experience. It was quite a oneness love experience. I mean, I think I walked through the world for like 6 weeks, being like attracted and hard for like every human being. Like I was,
I
like,
love this.
people who are not. There, I was just walking downtown and being like, "Wow, that's beautiful. You're beautiful. This is beautiful. This is all these women are so beautiful. Even I think there's a man over there who looks good too. This is weird."
This is so good.
And so I had this afterglow that really lasted. It was really disappointing when that went away. So that was sad. Uh, but I did take supplements. I did take 5-HTP, L-tyrosine, vitamin C. Other things like that to try to help with neurotransmitter balancing. Um, but yeah, it does seem in my experience of sampling many people that there's a group of people who have a MDMA rebound effect, who really have a, I don't know what it is, 20 to 40%, not 40, that seems high, 20 to 30% for sure, who the next few days can have sort of a dip in mood. And it seems to be maybe their neurotransmitters are already a little unbalanced before they go into the session, and the session depletes or causes some toxicity onto the serotonin receptors in the following few days. But usually they come out of that and within a few days. And then I think proper supplementation is not really being addressed in this community yet either.
Would you say that you figured out the supplementation on your own, or did the person you journeyed with have suggestions for you?
The person I journeyed with had suggestions. I think it's fairly typical to recommend 5-HTP, vitamin C, things like I can't. Our alpha lipoic acid is common. I personally believe, based on my training, that it's unwise to administer 5-HTP without L-tyrosine. And I also think NAC and vitamin C and glutathione is really depleted in the entire experience. And so my recommendation would be 300 milligrams of 5-HTP, 3,000 milligrams of L-tyrosine. Keep them in a 1 to 100 ratio in the days after per day. 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C spread out throughout the day. NAC, probably 500 or 900 milligram tablets 3 times a day. Just really trying to build up the building blocks of neurotransmitter production, because we don't know. None of us know when we go into a journey what is our ratio. Little serotonin high, dopamine high, and then we just mess it all up with the medicines, and then who knows what you need coming out there. I think it's total theory at this point that it's just 5-HTP. And so I have a theory that that protocol will work better for people, but hey, try it and let me know. I don't know.
I really appreciate you sharing the specifics there because, 5-HTP, do we take 100 milligrams or at that? Like, people need to know at least somewhere where to start. And so I appreciate those guidelines. And you and I talked a little bit beforehand. We'll wrap it up here by asking, do you have suggestions of, and I know I'm going to talk a little bit more in the scientific episode about this, but you were mentioning that there are some right to try studies, or there's some studies that people could get into. So if people hear this and they are looking for a way to be part of these studies, how would you recommend they get started?
Yeah, so there's currently, and I still believe they're enrolling studies around the United States sponsored by MAPS.org for MDMA trials. The majority of the trials are for resistant PTSD. So if you don't have a diagnosis of PTSD, you're unlikely to get into any of these trials, although there might still be a few healthy, quote unquote, safety trials. So again, check maps.org. They're enrolling. But that should be complete very quickly because the research is supposed to be wrapping in 2021, in which because of its breakthrough drug status for PTSD, basically what that means is the phase 2 research on MDMA was in the range of 67 to 73% effective in 12-month follow-ups for PTSD, for treatment-resistant PTSD, not just regular PTSD. So that is unheard of. I mean, the regular modalities for PTSD are like 20% or less if you're lucky. So basically, the FDA granted breakthrough drug status. It's fighting the DEA for us, actually. And so what this means is as long as the phase 3 trials show anywhere close to that kind of efficacy, it will automatically be legalized. It'll be automatically legalized as a treatment for PTSD in 2021 when it wraps. That being said, our president, Trump, I think everybody has a lot of opinions about him. They pushed through some legislation last year called the Right to Try Act. And so this act will hopefully be live faster than when the MAPS trials finish. And what the Right to Try Act says is that any phase 1 clinical study, any treatment that's past phase 1, which is basically safety trials, if you have a life-threatening condition and you've exhausted all options, you have the right to try these phase 1 certified medications. And so there's a current movement that is not figured out by any means for practitioners to get trained in the MAPS protocol for MDMA, which is very, very close to how I did my journeys. You have pre-meetings, you do your 6 to 8 hour window, it's blindfolded music, you have integration. That's all very, very similar. Dosing is a little lower, but 125 milligrams is still a very, very powerful dose. So these practitioners, we are hoping in 2019 here, some of them will be live, allowed to do right to try. Of course, the red tape and the fear is really high. Well, not the fear, the anxiety is really high about this, right? No practitioner wants to go before it's legalized completely and end up doing something that jeopardizes MDMA legality in a whole. And yet, everybody knows that there is millions of people that this could help. And so hopefully that will be legal in 2019. If not 2020 for sure, Right to Try should be available. It will be out of pocket. It will be expensive. And so sadly, the underground still might be a place for a lot of people to end up going.
Gotcha. This has been so valuable, Stephen. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you sharing your own journey and all of this knowledge about how other people can get some healing for themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for giving me the platform. And yeah, it's a breakthrough, it's a breakthrough therapy. It's what the mavericks are doing. And that's the word I want to get out there too, is the amount of tech entrepreneurs, the amount of people in the health world, the amount of psychiatrists. Again, you really don't know until you know just how prevalent MDMA has really helped shape some of the best thought leaders in the world. And now it's really time, I hope, to get this out to the rest of us.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you again, Stephen. And for everyone else out there, until next time.